On today's episode, we're taking a brief look back at the history of Norton. It all began with one man, James Lansdowne Norton. Born in Birmingham in 1869, Norton showed a keen interest in the mechanical at an early age, building a model steam engine at 10 years old. It wasn't a straight line to motorcycles for Norton. He did have a brief stint as an apprentice toolmaker in the jewellery trade. It wasn't until he was 29 that he took the first steps on the path that we would all know him by creating the Norton Manufacturing Company. The company grew from firstly supplying spare parts for bicycles to selling fully assembled bikes before it was interrupted when James fell ill with rheumatic fever. James would suffer from ill health throughout his life. This led to him looking much older than he actually was, something I feel reflects on my own life. In later years, he picked up the nickname Pa. At the turn of the century, Pa Norton would meet with Charles Garrard. Garrard was a kind of Elon Musk of his day, running a company that made electric cars. They didn't quite catch on that time around, so he moved on to building motorcycles with his new joint venture, Clement Garrard. Clement being Adolph Clement, who supplied the engines. And it would be a Clement engine that would find its way into Norton's first fully fledged motorcycle, the Enerjet. Or, of course, if you prefer, the Energet. That was in 1902, and just 5 years later in 1907, a Norton ridden by Harry Rembrandt Rem Fowler won the twin-cylinder class at the inaugural Isle of Man TT. Powered by a Peugeot engine, this bike was in some ways similar to the board track racers we talked about in one of our previous history episodes, in that it was single speed with no gearbox or clutch. This did have brakes, however, though they were of the bicycle-styled stirrup variety. Norton would build on the TT win, and in 1909 at the Stanley Cycle Show, James Norton exhibited motorcycles featuring his own engine design, the Big 4 side valve single. So it would appear to the world at large that things were on the up at Norton. However, James's bike building skills, it appears, far surpassed his business acumen. In 1913, the Norton Manufacturing Company went into liquidation. The company would be saved by Robert T. Shelley and rebranded Norton Motors Limited, with Shelley joining James as joint directors. This would have an added bonus, as Shelley's brother-in-law was talented tuner Dan O'Donovan, who would go on to win many races and set many records for Norton, alongside becoming their chief tester and eventual race team manager. Before this new team could get into their stride, everything would be disturbed by the outbreak of World War I. Although they still managed to produce motorcycles for civilians up to 1916, it was then that production was fully turned over to helping the war effort, with Norton also managing to land a contract to supply motorcycles to the Russian army. It would be in the 1910s that Norton would adopt the unapproachable Norton slogan and also update their logo to the one that we recognize today. It is said that the design was created by James Norton's daughter, Ethel. Norton would continue to produce a couple of their built drive machines for a short while post-World War I. They were the Brooklyn Special, so called because it had managed 75 miles per hour over 1 kilometer at Brooklands Motor Circuit, and the Brooklands Road Special, which had slightly tamer specs. Norton's progress would continue into the 1920s with the introduction of familiar models such as the 16H and Model 19. Their success at the Isle of Man TT would also continue. In 1924, they won the Senior TT and the Sidecar TT, the winners of that sharing a £20 prize. Earlier that year, Norton also patented a chain-driven overhead camshaft design he called Desmodromic. Sadly, it would be one of his last innovations, as in 1925, Norton's ill health finally caught up with him and he passed away. He was 56 years old. His legacy would go on, and the period between the two wars would see Norton's TT legend grow as they won 7 of the 9 Isle of Man TTs leading up to the start of World War II. This dominance led to the first use of the Manx name in the Norton range with the Manx Grand Prix editions, the Grand Prix part being dropped post-war. At the outset of the Second World War, Norton submitted a version of the 16H for evaluation by the British military, and they must have liked what they saw. With a few modifications, the WD-16H was born, and along with the big 4 side valve used with the sidecar, Norton produced roughly 100,000 motorcycles for the war effort. The post-war years would see many leaps forward for Norton. In 1949, we would see the first incarnation of the Burt Hopwood designed Model 7 Dominator. That same year would see work begin on the revolutionary featherbed frame. On the racetrack, Norton had started where they had left off after the war, along with enjoying success across the pond at the Daytona 200. They once again put their stamp on the Isle of Man TT, winning every year from 1947 to 1954. It wasn't all plain sailing, however, as their single-cylinder racer struggled against the Italian multi-cylinder efforts and those from AJS. Enter the McCandless brothers. Rex was a self-taught motorcycle engineer who would race a modified Triumph Tiger 100 along with his brother Cromie. One of the changes they had made to the bike was its innovative frame, which had a swing arm fitted with vertical hydraulic shock absorbers borrowed from a Citroen car. BSA had bought several modified bikes from the brothers, but Norton made the decision to sign them up to work for them exclusively. The result was the revolutionary featherbed frame. Incorporating over 40 feet of Reynolds steel tubing, the finished frame was a welded twin loop with swing arm fitted with the brothers' own design of shock absorbers and a heavily braced crossover headstock. The lighter, nimbler frame breathed new life into the race bikes, which had previously been built around the heavier, more rigid plunger frame nicknamed the Garden Gate. The new frame was an instant success at the Isle of Man TT, leading to a Norton 123 in the junior and senior events on its debut. The featherbed frame would eventually make its way to Norton's road bikes, and it would also prove very popular with bike builders, leading to the famous Norton Triumph Triton crossovers. They were normally a Norton featherbed frame coupled with a Triumph Bonneville engine. The frame would also be coupled with engines from Ariel, BSA, and even Harley-Davidson, amongst others. The frames had a downside, however. They were only made by Reynolds, the company who produced the steel, for the frames, and they struggled to keep up with demand. The public, eager to have the new frames and the home market road models, then neglected to buy the current models on sale, and by 1952 Norton again found themselves in financial difficulties. So in 1953 they were bought out by AMC. Originally founded as a parent company for Matchless and AJS, AMC had swallowed up manufacturers Francis Barnett and James before eventually bringing Norton into the fold. To compound things further, star racer Jeff Duke, frustrated at not having his warning that Norton needed to build a multi-cylinder racer or risk losing their dominance, left to link up with the multi-cylindered machines at Galera. A positive turn was that the Model 88, a Dominator with featherbed frame, which was initially only available to foreign markets, was eventually released for the domestic one and proved a good seller. Other bikes in the Norton range would eventually get the much coveted frame also. So, the AMC deal didn't seem so bad to begin with, but fast forward to 1960 and the cracks were already beginning to show. There were growing concerns amongst AMC shareholders that too many at the top of the structure had very little knowledge about motorcycles. Chairman Donald Heather was quoted as saying that motorcyclists like nothing more than pulling their engine apart on a Sunday afternoon, and another board member was a butcher by trade but had married one of the company's founder's daughters. Norton sales were going well, however, and Bert Hopwood, who was now managing director of Norton, was putting the final touches to a deal that would see production move to more modern premises. The deal would end up not going through as AMC needed the money set aside for it to plug a shortfall in their finances. Unsurprisingly, Hopwood would leave in 1961. Norton would eventually move production from Bracebridge Street, Birmingham, their home since World War I, though this was due to financial reasons rather than modernisation. In an effort to cut costs, AMC moved production to their Woolwich factory in East London. Things did not improve much, and in 1966, with Norton now only producing 2 models, AMC collapsed. Manganese Bronze Holdings, the parent company of Villiers, would be the ones to pick up the pieces, forming Norton Villiers with Dennis Poor as chairman. And so, with a new injection of cash, a year later, the Norton Commando was born, along with a new groundbreaking isolastic frame. This period would also see the introduction of the P11 series and see production move once more, this time to Andover. The 1970s found the once world-leading British motorcycle manufacturing scene in a very bad way. The once all-conquering BSA, who now counted Triumph as one of its subsidiaries, found itself in a bad financial position and, as part of a government bailout, had to merge with the much smaller Norton Villiers, creating Norton Villiers Triumph, NVT. The Triumph name being chosen as it was felt it had stronger international appeal. Norton would also gain BSA's designs for a Wankel-type rotary engine, which they would go on to develop. For their part of the deal, Manganese Bronze Holdings would receive all BSA's non-motorcycling departments. This included car bodies, builders of the classic hackney carriage taxis. On the racetrack, Norton was still a force for this period, seeing the formation of the John Player racing team under the management of Frank Perris. And in 1973, Peter Williams won the F750 TT on a Norton he had designed. It wouldn't be long before trouble was brewing once more, however. The government funding that NVT relied upon to keep their heads above water was withdrawn by Edward Heath's Tory government, only to be reinstated by the incoming Labour government of Harold Wilson. It was also decided to cut production sites from 4 to 2, these being in Wolverhampton and BSA's Small Heath site. The news of mass redundancies at Triumph's Meriden site did not go down well with the workers, who staged a 2-year sit-in and eventually formed a cooperative, making Triumph motorcycles for their sole customer, NVT. All this led to NVT losing an estimated £20,000 per week, and things would only get worse from there when, in 1975, the industry minister refused to renew Norton's export credits and, to further compound things, recalled a £4 million loan. This once more pushed Norton and its various components to the brink, though some say management were driving them in that direction anyway. In 1978, NVT would be liquidated, with the rights to the Norton name being shared across several companies. The British arm would survive as Norton Motors Limited, operating out of a factory in Shenstone and continuing the development of rotary engine machines. The first of those bikes was the Interpol 2, a bike created for use by the police, with the rotary engine eventually finding its way into a civilian bike in the form of the Norton Classic and Commander. The Wankel would go on to have great success on the racetrack too, with Ron Haslam, Steve Hislop and Robert Dunlop amongst others enjoying great success with the RCW 588 and its variants. These successes were overseen by new chairman, the very French-sounding Philippe Leroux, who had taken over from Dennis Poor. Sadly for Norton, Leroux was, for all intents and purposes, a shyster. Having lost millions of pounds trying to diversify the company's assets by investing in leisure and property ventures, Leroux, along with company secretary Peter Hooper, attempted to get shareholders to stump up $7.5 million to fill the gap, claiming a company called Manstrom had already pledged $1.5 million. In truth, Manstrom's assets amounted to £2, with the only director being Leroux's mother. Leroux would later resign and the company would be sold to a Canadian firm, Wildrose Ventures, for less than £500,000. The Norton brand name would be bounced around for years after, and at one point during the 90s it was thought that we may get a beastly machine from Norton Motors International, a joint venture from Norton Motorcycles Limited of Shenstone and March Motors International, a US company. The Nemesis would have been powered by a 1500cc 4-valve per cylinder fuel-injected V8 engine, having no less than 3 spark plugs per cylinder. The figures quoted said it would have 280 horsepower, go from 0 to 60 in under 2.5 seconds, and have a top speed of over 220 miles per hour. This would never come to be, and the Norton brand would eventually end up in the hands of one Stuart Garner. Now, I know you all know where this is heading, but things, on the outside at least, seem to be heading in the right direction. Garner had picked up the rights from Kenny Dreer, the American who had been keeping the Norton name alive, working on a modern version of the Commando. Garner, already a partner at Spondon, the frame manufacturers, set up shop in Donington Park, and the new Norton set about developing a bike based around Dreer's prototype, along with an updated version of the NRV 588 race bike. Sadly, it would be another case of things looking rather rosy on the outside, while something much darker stirred below. Despite there being a long waiting list of people who had placed deposits for bikes, and the fact that they had a £7.5 million loan underwritten by the government, there was a steady flow of disquiet coming from the reborn bike maker. One of the first signs of a potential issue was back in August 2019, with Garner looking for $5 million to expand the Donington Park site. Banks, individuals, a loan or equity in the business, Garner didn't seem bothered where the money came from. Then in November he appealed to the real bikers, the people who get Norton. He said he had spoke to the big bankers and they just didn't understand. A crowdfunding campaign was even set up where you could own a piece of Norton for as little as £50. This was soon pulled, however, when a mystery investor intervened with £1 million. The money, if it did appear, did not seem to stretch, however, and by January 2020, Garner found himself in court with Norton, owing over £300,000 in unpaid taxes, and by the end of the month, Norton found themselves in administration. This is where the true scale of the situation began to come to light. £14 million in debt, over 450 customers who paid a deposit who would no longer get a bike or their money back, and over 200 people's pensions potentially being lost forever, as Garner had misled them by convincing them to convert them into Norton shares. This missing pension pot amounted to another 14 million. How much in the company accounts? Less than 190,000. While the administrators were revealing all of this, Garner was nowhere to be seen, even failing to appear before the pensions ombudsman. He did, however, pop up to reveal he had sold the rights to the 961 engine platform to Chinese company Jinlang. This, he was adamant, was before administrators took over.
The situation with Garner is still ongoing, and the information is still coming in even as we put this episode together. Suffice to say that the pensions ombudsman has ordered him to repay some £14 million. Now, there's a sum of money, and I would highly recommend that you follow the link above that would take you through to John Hogan's work at superbike.co.uk, who has done some excellent work following Garner through this moment.
So, where does that leave Norton now? Well, despite the troubles, there were apparently over 300 expressions of interest in buying the hard done by manufacturer, most of those from within the industry. The eventual buyers were Indian company TVS, the third largest motorcycle manufacturer in India. So far, they have declared they will continue to build bikes in the UK, first continuing at the Donington Park site before a likely move to Warwick. They have also committed to fulfilling all previous orders.
TVS are making all the right noises, and if they can deliver just half of what ICA have managed at Royal Enfield, perhaps now Norton can find themselves in the safe hands they've long needed. So there you have it, a brief history of Norton. And yes, as long as this episode was, rest assured it could have been easily 10 times longer. Norton really does have a long and complex history, which hopefully it's at the dawn of a new, more prosperous future. But what do you think? Do you think TVS will deliver some of the sunshine and glory that ICA's managed to do at Royal Enfield? And do you have any comments on Stuart Garner? I hope you've enjoyed this, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support us, then check out our Patreon site where you'll get some extra goodies. Always, we do like to see the comments in the comments box, so definitely do that. But as of right now, you've been told, on your bike,